In school, we are usually taught to reduce the beginning of the First World War to a single event: an archduke shot in Sarajevo, followed by states rushing into war in a chain reaction driven by bloodlust. This explanation is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Because trying to explain the deaths of millions of people, the collapse of vast empires, and the Middle Eastern problems we are still living with today through a single assassination genuinely feels insufficient. If we really want to understand why such a war broke out, we need to look beyond political tensions in Europe. The real issue is the balance of power, economics, and trade routes. And at the center of this story is a project very few people have ever heard of: the Berlin-Baghdad Railway project. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was largely under the control of the British Empire. This control rested on two fundamental pillars. The first was the Royal Navy, the most powerful navy in the world. The second was the Suez Canal. Suez was the key link between Britain and India. India was the economic backbone of the empire at the time. This mattered. Whoever controlled Suez controlled trade between East and West. Germany was among the countries most disturbed by this situation. Having unified in 1871, Germany quickly became one of Europe's strongest industrial powers. It was advancing rapidly in production, science, and technology. However, it had a major problem. It had no overseas colonies, and no navy capable of protecting global trade like Britain's. The German economy was growing, but the secure trade routes needed to sustain that growth were controlled by the British. At the same time, the Ottoman Empire was facing a very serious crisis. Militarily, it had weakened, but the real problem was financial. The Ottoman state was heavily indebted to British and French banks. In 1881, it declared bankruptcy, and soon after, a significant part of its economy came under foreign control. A large portion of collected taxes went directly to European creditors. This effectively meant the empire had lost its economic independence. Sultan Abdul Hamid II was searching for a way out of this situation. He needed infrastructure that could move the army quickly, strengthen central authority, and modernize the country. However, investment from Britain or France would only deepen dependence. At this point, the interests of Germany and the Ottoman Empire aligned. The Germans proposed building a railway stretching from Berlin to Baghdad via Istanbul. Once completed, this line would allow Germany to reach the Middle East and the Indian Ocean without relying on the British Navy. The Ottoman Empire, in turn, would gain both military and economic strength. German banks financed the project and German engineers built it. However, this project represented a serious threat to Britain, because the railway would bypass Britain's dominance over maritime trade. And the issue was not just trade. At the time, navies were transitioning from coal to oil. Britain had no domestic oil resources and depended heavily on Middle Eastern oil. It was becoming clear that the regions the railway passed through, especially Mesopotamia, contained vast oil reserves. German access to this region was unacceptable from Britain's perspective. Britain tried various methods to stop the project. It made agreements with local rulers in Kuwait to block the railway's access to the Persian Gulf. It applied pressure within international financial circles. It carried out propaganda campaigns against the Ottoman Empire and Germany. Despite this, construction continued, and by 1914 the line was largely complete. It was at this point that the First World War began. The outbreak of the war was related to European alliances, but one of the first strategic moves of the war took place in the Middle East. British forces landed in Basra. Officially, the mission was to protect oil facilities, but the real objective was to seize control of the railway and the oil regions. The Ottoman Empire entered the war believing Germany would win. However, the railway was not fully completed. Gaps in the line, especially in the Taurus Mountains, severely disrupted Ottoman logistics. German supplies could not reach the front lines in time. This weakened Ottoman military resistance and allowed Britain to gradually gain the upper hand. While the war continued, Britain and France secretly planned how to divide Ottoman territories. The borders drawn under the Sykes-Picot Agreement ignored ethnic and religious realities. Most of these borders were directly linked to the railway route and oil regions. By the end of the war, the Ottoman Empire had collapsed. The railway was divided among different states and never functioned as an integrated system. The region was fragmented and its economic unity was destroyed. The Middle East was pushed into a state of dependence and instability. This story did not end in 1918. The same strategic mindset continued through the Second World War, the Cold War, and still persists today. China's Belt and Road Initiative is often seen as a much larger version of the Berlin-Baghdad Railway from a century ago. The idea of building land routes to counter naval power has not changed, neither have the fears, reactions, and rhetoric. The Berlin-Baghdad Railway teaches us this: infrastructure projects are never just economic investments. They shift power balances and turn states into targets. To understand today's Middle East, we must look beyond religious or cultural explanations. The fate of this region has largely been shaped by trade routes and energy resources. Sometimes the cause of a war is not a weapon, but a railway. If this perspective gave you a new way of looking at history, subscribe. With your support, we can continue to grow. History shows us the truth. I show you where to look.